In every relationship that mattered to you, there was a version of you that got to show up. And there was a version of you that didn't. Not because you were hiding something, not because you were dishonest, but because the relationship had a shape, and the shape only had room for certain parts of you. The useful parts, the easy parts, the parts that fit what the other person needed from someone in your role. This is about everything else, the parts that didn't get invited, and what it costs to leave them outside for long enough. Every relationship creates a version of you, not deliberately, not through anyone's conscious design, but through the accumulation of what is welcomed and what is not, what produces warmth and what produces distance, what makes the relationship function and what creates friction. And over time, you learn to lead with the parts that work, to bring forward the version of yourself that fits the shape of the connection. This is not dishonesty. It is how relationships work. Everyone does this to some degree. But for some people, the gap between who they are in the relationship and who they are outside of it becomes very wide. And the parts left outside become, over time, not just unexpressed, but forgotten. In the relationship that comes to mind when you hear this, there was a version of you they needed. Maybe they needed you steady when they were not. Maybe they needed you to be the one who understood, who didn't push back, who absorbed difficulty without adding to it. Maybe they needed you smaller, less opinionated, less demanding, less likely to take up space in ways that complicated what they needed the relationship to be. And you became that version, not all at once, but gradually, through the quiet calibration of what was welcome and what was not. You shaped yourself to fit what was needed, and the relationship functioned. It worked. In its way, people stayed. The connection continued. But the version of you that showed up to make it work was only ever part of the story. Outside the relationship, there were parts of you that had nowhere to go. Opinions that were too strong for the dynamic that had developed. Needs that were too large for the space that had been allocated. Reactions that were too real for the version of you the relationship had come to expect. And those parts, the ones that didn't get invited in, didn't disappear. They went somewhere quieter, into the part of you carried alone, into the thoughts you had but didn't say, into the feelings you felt but learned to set aside. And over years, the gap between the version of you they knew and the version of you that existed beyond the relationship. At some point, a question arrived that was harder than it should have been. Which parts of me are actually mine? Not which parts were formed by experience. Not which parts were shaped by the people around you. Not which parts emerged from circumstances you didn't choose. But which parts, underneath all of that, are genuinely, recognizably, irreducibly you. This is about that question, and why asking it might be one of the bravest things you ever do. Most people never ask this question, not because they don't care about who they are, but because the question itself feels destabilizing. If you pull at the thread, if you start examining which parts of you are genuine and which parts are simply well-practiced, you risk discovering that more of you than you expected is the second thing. And that discovery can feel like loss, like finding out that the home you've been living in was built on borrowed materials. But here is what the question also makes possible. The beginning of knowing what you are, actually building toward, not what you were shaped into, not what the rooms required, but what you would choose if choosing were fully available to you. The confusion usually arrives in a quiet moment. Not a crisis, not a breakdown, just a pause, a moment when you catch yourself doing something saying something, reacting to something, and for the first time in a long time, you wonder, is this actually what I think? Or is this what I learned to think? Is this preference genuinely mine? Or did I absorb it from someone whose approval mattered so much that their preferences became easier to adopt than to question? Is this reaction coming from something real in me? Or from a pattern so old, so practiced, that it operates almost below the level of choice? The confusion is not comfortable, but it is important because it is the first sign that something in you is starting to ask a better question than the ones you have been living inside. The reason this question is difficult is not that the answer is hidden. It is that the categories themselves are harder to separate than they first appear. Because the self is not divided cleanly into authentic and adapted. Some things that began as adaptation have been practiced long enough that they have become genuinely yours. Some things that feel most essentially you were shaped so early by such powerful forces that the shaping itself is part of who you are. And some things, the most interesting ones, are both real and adapted simultaneously, genuine responses to genuine experiences. So the question is not a simple sorting exercise. It is not. This is real, this is not. It is something more nuanced. Something more like, they are still there, quieter than they should be, less practiced than they once were, but still present, still yours. And the work, if it can be called that, is not to find new people to show those parts to. Not immediately. The work is simply to remember that those parts exist, to stop treating the edited version as the complete version, to give the unexpressed parts enough space, even just in your own interior life, to exist without apology. Because a self that is never fully acknowledged even to itself is a self that has been abandoned twice. Once by the relationship that didn't make room for it, and once by you, when you began to believe that what wasn't welcomed, there wasn't worth keeping. It was worth keeping, all of it. It still is.